to Meanwhile in the West, my weekly series where I read through the letters to the editor in my local newspaper, the West Australian, and I criticise the stupid people who write in stupid things. First up, bowled over by Ebola, 29th of October 2014. My eyesight is still good, but I need subtitles for television news. Subtitles on any channel are abysmal. There's a virus threatening the world, and subtitles named it Ebola. Please, TV media, give us more accurate spelling before World War III breaks out in suburbia. John Reed, Dale. This highlights an interesting problem. Live TV, of which most news broadcasts are subtitled usually automatically because human subtitlers can't necessarily keep up with the pace at which live news is produced, and or doing so is too expensive. And so you get the same quality captions as you get on YouTube auto caption, which you can turn on here if you want to laugh, which is not that good. You can barely make sense of it if you're trying hard and you have some idea what they're talking about. And so I'm not surprised that Ebola gets turned into Ebola. That's probably one of the better automatic translations I've seen. Now, scheduled TV broadcasts generally get subtitled ahead of time, or at least some subset of what's broadcast here gets closed captioned by humans and is professionally done and is perfectly intelligible. But live stuff doesn't get done. This is just one of the challenges to being deaf or having other hearing problems. But I actually wanted to use this letter just to point out that all of my scripted videos, of which this is the only series that I do so far that isn't scripted, all my other videos are scripted. I actually make sure that I put captions. So all of my videos are captioned for the deaf or otherwise hard of hearing, or people who prefer to read rather than to listen. So if you prefer that, you can always turn on the captions. It doesn't have an option for Australian English, so I always use British English, UK English. And if you really want to have a little bit of a giggle, then try using the auto-captioning, which is always a little bit funny. Anyway, so that's what I wanted to point out. Next up, how sustainable? 30th of October 2014. I'm sure plenty of families are living quite comfortably in Perth on much less than $170,000. Academic blames Perth sprawl for job rejection. News. If John Rennie cannot find a way to make that work, perhaps sustainability is not the field for him. Bradley Lang, Canning Vale. So I assume this is $170,000 a year. That sounds like a fairly decent academic wage here in Perth, especially for somebody of international importance, which I assume they must be if we're looking to recruit them from overseas. Now, the point here is that not that the person could not live comfortably within Perth on that amount of money. You're quite right. It's reasonable to live comfortably. The point was that we were trying to entice him to come to Perth to live on that amount of money, and his expectations were that as a sort of a relatively senior academic, that he should be able to live in a suburb that had good public transport links, that was relatively central to the city, where he would not have to be commuting for long periods of time every day to get to work. And the thing was, he couldn't on that kind of a wage. That is a good wage here in Perth, but due to the property boom and the subsequent massive increases in the house of properties here in Perth, it wasn't enough for him to be able to purchase a house for him and his family that was actually close to public transport links in a relatively well-to-do suburb that enabled him to work without having long commuting distances. What most people who are living on those kind of incomes here in Perth do not live in sort of fairly well-to-do central suburbs, or if they do, are not close to public transport. These kind of suburbs command much more of a premium. That's how overpriced Perth's got. So it wasn't that he couldn't live comfortably, it was that it wouldn't accommodate the quality of life to which he was accustomed living in other countries around the world, in other cities. Now, people have also written in to complain that, people in his position would also not be able to, have the kind of lifestyle he was expecting in places like Tokyo, London, or New York. And the problem here is that Perth is not Tokyo, London, or New York. Perth is not even Sydney. And yet, the kind of house prices and the kind of bad public transport that we have here is at least comparable to Sydney, without any of the without a lot of the other perks that you get for living in a large city. We don't have the same level of cultural recreational type activities available here. Now, that's not to bash Perth. Perth has a fantastic lifestyle on offer, but what it doesn't have is a big city lifestyle, but it has a big city price tag. We're also hugely isolated here in the middle of nowhere, which means that for overseas people, they then have extra taxes, not taxes, but extra costs involved in trying to keep in touch with their family. So returning home on a visit is very expensive from Perth. Americans are shocked at how much it costs to travel to to Australia, but also particularly to travel to Perth. There's much extra cost in living in Perth than, say, Sydney. And so, yeah, he could have lived comfortably here, but not in the lifestyle to which he was expecting. Now, the other thing is that the other aspect of Perth's lifestyle is he is very much unsustainable. And here was an academic who was, his job title was he was going to be the Professor of Sustainability. And essentially what we were going to do was require him to live a completely unsustainable lifestyle. The kind of carbon footprint that we have here in Australia, we are one of the highest, if not the highest, per capita carbon emitters. That is, on a per capita basis, Australia emits far more carbon equivalents than most other countries. We have a very unsustainable lifestyle. It's only because of our small population that we as a country are not higher in terms of our climate damage. Perth in particular is even more so because of our isolation, which means that a lot of food and goods have to be shipped in at long distance. Combine that with basically almost no rail freight, means that everything is freighted in from the east on trucks at long distances. Large commuting times, the huge urban sprawl in Perth, combined with our lack of... We have some public transport, it's not that bad, but it's not quite up to an international standard. So that means that our whole lifestyle here in WA, in Perth, is very much unsustainable. So not only were we expecting him to come here to be a professor of sustainability, but we're expecting him to live a lifestyle that was not up to the international standards, but also not even particularly sustainable. Now, that's a good argument for why we need professors of sustainability here, but we're not going to entice them the way that we've been going about it. Next up, Target retailers, 30th of October 2014. So the federal government is going to increase excise on fuel by about half a cent a litre. Filling an 80-litre tank will cost 40 cents more. Big deal. The government should look at fuel retailers and sort out those money grabbers. A great saving would be to demolish WA's Fuel Watch, which does nothing. GJ Singleton, Attadale. Okay, so you're wrong on all 3 points here. You are right, though, that a half a cent increase in fuel taxes is very small and basically minimal. So yes, an 80-litre tank, you're looking at 40 cents more per tank. The average person, I think, would be filling up maybe once every week or two. Round figures, 50 cents a week would be grossly overestimating it, which would mean it's about $20 a year, say, to the average motorist, which is basically nothing. That's the one thing you get right. The problem is that essentially what happened in a political move, back in 2001, the Conservative Howard government froze fuel excise. So before that, the taxes on fuel, liquid fuels like petrol and diesel, were increased regularly, I think once a year, in keeping with inflation. So that the idea was that it would keep pace with inflation. In a political move, the Conservative government froze that. It also did it in a particularly damagingly environmental move, because essentially what it meant is that fuel excise has stayed flat since 2001, so for 13 years it hasn't gone up, whereas cost of living and inflation has gone up, which means that in real terms, fuel tax has actually gone backwards, which means that fuel has been artificially cheaper than it otherwise would have been, encouraging fuel use. Particularly damaging is things like diesel fuel for use in generators and industrial power. Anyway, the current Conservative government is faced with a massive budgetary problems, partly because revenues for the government in terms of taxation have not been growing as much as expenditures has, partly because of things like freezes on the fuel tax excise. So what the federal government has looked to do now is not to simply increase fuel excise by 0.5 cent per litre. That is that is not what they're really doing. What they're doing is reintroducing indexation so that fuel excise will keep pace with inflation from now here on in. So the first step in that will be a 0.5 cent a litre increase, but it will continue from there. So at the moment it's 38.1 cents a litre and a little bit. It's going up to 38.5 cents a litre, but it's going to be indexed every 6 months from here on in. That means it will keep up with inflation and it will help to sustain some of the shortfall in revenues that the government has been experiencing. So, that part you got wrong. The other thing that you got wrong is that it's not the fuel retailers who have any kind of say in fuel prices here in Western Australia, and I think in the whole of Australia, basically. So what we have here is we have the fuel producers sign exclusive, or wholesalers, sign deals with small businesses generally to run the retail sites on their behalf. The fuel wholesalers, so the large ones like Shell and BP are the main ones here in WA, then set the prices for the pump price for the fuel, supply the fuel, and take the money for the fuel. The retailers' only job is to actually run the site, and they make their money purely off sales of non-fuel products. And so they don't actually get any say in the setting of fuel prices. I know this from having worked in the industry myself. Which means that the fuel retailers essentially don't have any say and can't do anything about it. And so it's not the fuel resellers which are the money grabbers, it's the wholesalers. But the wholesalers essentially have not quite a duopoly. There's maybe 3 or 4, but there really is only 3 or 4, and they have a fairly cosy relationship with each other. Nobody's looking to do massive undercutting of each other. And actually, whenever we've had an inquiry into it, it's always found that there really isn't huge profits to be made in those industries, that they are running fairly close to small profit margins. It's just that because the prices that you pay at the pump generally are linked to international markets. International markets are fairly volatile, and therefore we end up with fairly volatile fuel prices. Also, we've got to ship them here in relatively small quantities, given our small market, and so it's not the most efficient market here in WA. Now, the last thing you're wrong on is Fuel Watch. Fuel Watch doesn't really cost much. We have the fairly different from most places here. Whoever sets the price, so here it's wholesalers generally, have to notify the government in advance of what their prices are going to be on the following day. These prices are then fixed for that 24-hour period of the coming day and made available to the public via the Fuel Watch website. It costs very little to run it, and what it does is it stops any kind of price gouging. So what happens in other markets, and what used to happen here before Fuel Watch, is that you could see cheap fuel at a service station on the way to work, think, I need to stop there on the way back from work, and when you came past, it was gone. And so what this really encouraged was there was a lot of uncertainty amongst motorists about whether it was actually cheap fuel or whether it was only cheap. You have to drive past several sites to be able to tell whether it was actually cheap or whether the place down the road would have it cheaper. And then by the time you'd driven past several sites, they may well have changed. And so sometimes we'd have price wars where service stations were cutting their prices in real time to try and compete with each other. But a lot of time, actually, we'd have places where one site would see that down the road had a higher price, and they would put their prices up, knowing that they weren't particularly interested in competing. And so what's actually been found when we've done the research is since we've had Fuel Watch, it means that anybody can go, look on the website for Fuel Watch, see what tomorrow's prices are going to be, and you can search and find the cheapest price in your area and know that it's guaranteed to be that cheap for the entirety of tomorrow. So you don't have to rush around, you don't have to worry about it going up. All the research has shown that basically motorists have been saving small amounts of money, but interestingly, cost-conscious motorists have been saving quite a lot. That is, people like pensioners who are on fixed incomes and have some control over, when they can purchase their petrol and can do the research ahead of time, have actually been beneficiaries of it. People who are not particularly cost conscious just go to wherever they feel like going to, whatever's convenient, and they pay whatever price. And generally they pay a premium, which helps to shore up those people who benefit. So actually, Fuel Watch has done, it hasn't revolutionised the industry, but it's actually, it has been an improvement, especially for those people who need it most. Nothing but hot air. 1st of November 2014. It is a pity that CSIRO, the Meteorological Bureau, and the Climate Change Authority all appear to have lost records of Australian temperatures between 1890 and 1910. The rest of us can find records and stories of the Federation drought from 1896 to 1903, at which time there were few motor cars or coal-fired power stations and no jet aircraft. Is it possible that natural causes produced the drought, or did it just not happen? Robert Brooks Geraldton. So this is a disingenuous attempt to undermine the idea of climate change. He is right. There was what is broadly known as the Federation drought from about 1896 to 1903, so just over 100 years ago. There was about a 7-year period. Actually, in the research I've done, it's 1895 to 1902 is what's generally held to be the Federation drought. So a 7-year period in which there was extensive drought conditions across much of Australia. It was not one long continuous drought. It was a sequence of droughts with some wet years in between in some areas. But essentially it was a massively destructive drought. The thing is, the Australian climate has always had drought. In our recorded history, the last 200 years, there have been regular drought conditions, and there have been major countrywide droughts on a roughly every 10 to 15 year cycle. Roughly in that, not quite a cycle, but in the time period of roughly every 10 to 15 years, we will have a major countrywide drought. It's not surprising there was one 115 years ago. And no, it wasn't man-made, it wasn't anthropogenic climate change that was responsible. That said, if you look through the history books, what you'll find is that actually in the last 15 years in our history, from about the year 2000 to now, we have also experienced about 15 years of drought. We have had 1 year, 2012, out of the last 14 that was not a drought year. Much of Australia has been in drought conditions for almost all of the last 15 years. So this puts the Federation drought to shame. Thankfully, we are a much more prosperous nation with much higher technological capabilities, and so the effects of this drought have been massively mitigated by our 100+ years of technological advancements and the prosperity of our nation at the moment, which means that we can just simply desalinate seawater, and we can do all sorts of other things like that to prevent the same kind of impacts from occurring. But actually, the amount of drought that we've had in Australia has dramatically increased, and all of the relevant scientists, those people who are experts in the field and know what they're talking about, agree that no one drought can be pointed at as definitely 100% caused by human-induced climate change. But we should expect to see, as a result of climate change and global warming, increased drought conditions in much of Australia. And that is precisely what we're seeing. Whereas the Federation drought was considered a massive climate condition at the time. It was a huge deal. It was 7 years of drought. We've recently we're in the middle of, well, we're still in 14 years of drought, twice as long. And so some portion of that was exacerbated, almost certainly, by climate change caused by people. And so the fact that there was a Federation drought doesn't undermine the case for climate change. It's not like climate change scientists are saying, well, there was never a drought before and now there is one. It is somewhat more nuanced than that. And the fact that you don't seem to appreciate that suggests to me that you are not qualified to comment on whether or not global warming and climate change is actually happening. Last up, Jobs for the Girls, 4th of November 2014. I remind Carol Peters, Woman in Power, Letters 3rd of the 11th, that for Tony Abbott, it's quality rather than quantity that matters when it comes to the sex of people he appoints to his front bench and cabinet. Gender ratio and political correctness are not criteria. Julie Bishop holds the important portfolio of Foreign Affairs Minister, not because she's a woman. It's because she is highly competent at what she does. Mr Abbott also has Peter Credlin as his Chief of Staff for the same reason. If other women on the government side prove worthy of promotion, almost certainly Mr Abbott will recognise this and reward them accordingly. Derek Davidson, Bunbury. So, yes, what we have with our current government is we have two women. We have one woman in the cabinet, which is the most important ministers, and we have a few more outside of cabinet in ministerialships. But we have a significant reduction over the previous couple of governments in the number of women represented at federal government level. And they're so underrepresented that the Prime Minister himself had to appoint himself as the Minister for Women because he didn't actually have a suitably qualified woman to appoint as women. And you rightly point out the idea that they should be appointed on merit. And nobody, I say this again, nobody is arguing against that. Nobody says that some unqualified woman should be promoted to federal cabinet. But there are two issues going on here. So firstly, there is the question of why the Liberal Party happens to only have one woman of sufficient quality to be deemed, to be in federal cabinet. Where are all the rest of the women? Why are there not simply more women in there? Now, the obvious and I hope wrong answer, well, not even I hope, I know wrong answer, is that there just aren't that many women who are sufficiently intelligent in the world. This is demonstrably false, purely because all of the other parties have higher representation of women without having any kind of quota. So when you have a party on the left, left-wing parties attract far more women of at least as high a calibre as the men they attract. So there's no need for other parties to do any kind of quota system or putting forward women who are not of sufficient calibre. But the parties on the right, in particular the Liberal Party here, does seem to struggle to attract women. So it might be that something about right-wing politics is inherently not attractive to women and is probably actually biased against women. So there's that possibility. And if you were, I don't know, a party that was explicitly anti-woman, then you would not have a problem with this. If your party said, look, we don't like women, we don't think they should have the vote, or we think women are inferior creatures, or something like that, then fair enough, you don't have many women in your ranks. But the Liberal Party is ostensibly pro-women. The Liberal Party, as most right-wing parties, identify themselves as supporting equality of the sexes. That, women can do anything that men can, and that we shouldn't discriminate based on sex. So the fact that they don't seem to attract nor promote women at the same rate as other parties suggests that there is probably some inherent gender bias in their promotional policies, in the way that they interact with women, in the way that they, do or do not try and attract people to their party. Their party probably overwhelmingly attracts white, middle-class men, or wealthy men. That actually seems to be who they end up with, probably not entirely by accident. So there's that issue. Now, the other thing that's going on here, interestingly, is if you look at the three women of note within federal parliament at the moment is Julie Bishop, who's the deputy and foreign minister, who is widely considered to be excellent in her role. We have Bronwyn Bishop, no relation, who is the speaker, who's been around forever, and is a bit pedantic to my tastes, and I disagree with her politics, but also seems to be a fairly astute political operative. And then you have Peter Cridlin, who is who's mentioned in this letter, but isn't actually a politician. She's his chief of staff, so she's just somebody that he's employed. All of these women are widely considered to be very good at their jobs. And that's the standard that women are being held to here. Women have to be very good in order to make it into cabinet or positions of power, whereas there are plenty of men who get into their positions without being very good. In fact, there are some real duds. There are plenty of men who get promoted simply because they've been around long enough, because they have the right connections, for all sorts of other reasons that women don't get the benefit of. And so what we end up with is we have very good women and we have average to poor men. who get the positions, and also some very good men. So there are certainly men who are on par with those women, but there are also an awful lot of terrible men who get these positions as well. I would prefer a Michaela Cash over a Matthias Cormann any day, or a bloody Christopher Pine. And so you've got women who are in the outer ministry who are at least as competent as some men who are in the inner ministry. So what you have is, although there is ostensibly no gender bias in the criteria for being appointed to the inner ministry or to positions of power, in effect, you still have a gender bias, because there is some kind of there are other things going into the decision-making. Tony Abbott, in choosing his ministers, is not perfectly fair to both sexes. And the thing is, he's probably worse because he's on the right of politics and he has a lot more intrinsic sexism. But it is not that much better over on the left. The Labour Party only has sort of 30 to 40% of their parliamentarians are women. Yes, they managed to get one into position of Prime Minister, although that was done on a whole pile of dodgy dealings. Yes, they definitely have better than a right wing, but they're still nowhere near half the thing. And being a parliamentarian, the actual job of being being a politician, is not one for which men are particularly well suited. If anything, it should be, stereotypically, a more feminised profession, because it involves networking and compromise and relationships between people. Getting legislation passed in a situation like, in a government like, a parliament like ours, should be playing to women's strengths. In the stereotypical view of genders. So if anything, you would expect it to be highly feminised, except for the fact that it is a powerful position. And power attracts people who want to stay in power and plays to all the other biases. So anyway, there you go. I don't think women should be in positions of power because they are more deserving, but purely because I can see that deserving women don't get the same recognition that undeserving men seem to get. Anyway, that's it for this week. I feel much better having had a rant. I hope you're all doing well, and I'll see you next time when we find out what's happening in the West. See ya.